We call this time of year the Bring Out Your Dead season because that's when you bury the news. Take out the trash, it's referred to by other people. Well, Peter Dutton kicked it off, of course, with his much-fated nuclear costings a week or so ago when everybody was hungover from Christmas parties and people were already departing for holidays. But now we are really in the thick of it. This is the black plague of political and corporate corpses coming out now. Dan Duggan. If you haven't heard about Dan Duggan, he's the formerly US, became an Australian citizen, airline pilot. He was a US Marine. Now, in the spirit of minimising the outcry, the government waited till a few days before Christmas before burying the news that Dan Duggan was going to be extradited to the US to face charges of espionage. Just imagine, here is a guy that has spent almost 2 years, 800 days, in a maximum security jail in Australia without charges. I mean, how is that legal? How is that adherence to the principles of law and the law itself? It's required that you be charged under Australian law. You can't just be detained for 800 days in a maximum security cell. Well, you can now. And why? Because a foreign government, the US, wanted to make an example of Daniel Duggan. Imagine this poor guy. His wife and his 6 kids. And here's the Australian government, bring out your dead, sneaking out the news just before Christmas that they're going to put you on a plane to face jail in the US, potentially 60 years jail. It's just another Assange situation. What would Safrine Duggan, Daniel's wife, tell the children? That the Australian government is a bunch of patsies who kowtow obsequiously to America, and that's why Daddy's facing jail, that's why he's leaving, he's being taken to America, that's why Daddy's going away. Because we are patsies to soon-to-be the administration of Donald Trump. Safrine Duggan said, Mr. Dreyfus confirmed, Dreyfus is the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, Mr. Dreyfus confirmed the extradition had been approved but would not reveal when Duggan will be transferred to the US, citing a long-standing practice of the government not commenting on operational matters relating to extradition. Convenient that, the good old NatSec excuse. So why was this guy wanted? Why is he in jail without charges? Well, Duggan was arrested in Australia in October 2022 at the behest of the US after being accused of breaching arms trafficking laws by providing military training to Chinese pilots in South Africa between 2010 and 2012. A lot of pilots, former Marine pilots, fighter jet pilots do this. They go off into the private sector and they teach. Anyway, he was teaching in South Africa. He allegedly received $100,000 for his services. But what is so strange about this story, we broke the story about the proliferation of Chinese flight schools in Australia, or rather, flight schools to train Chinese pilots in Australia. And we broke the story in 2019 here at Michael West Media. There were a number of them. Yes, training Chinese pilots. Now, Anthony Clan, a mate of mine and a former colleague at the Australian newspaper, the Israelian, Clan defected from the Australian newspaper because the News Corp bosses muzzled his investigations. He couldn't get them into the newspaper, including this expose into secret Chinese plans to control a mega flight school on an Australian Air Force training facility up near Tamworth. Virgin Australia, the story said, may have misled all levels of the Australian government and has made dubious public claims about the true identity of its shadowy Chinese partners in its secretive proposal to take control of the nation's biggest military pilot school at an RAAF training facility in Tamworth, New South Wales. Now, bear in mind that there were a number of schools in Australia. We also detailed these training Chinese pilots. That's what Dan Duggan was doing in South Africa. So what we have here is just a gargantuan double standard going on. Here we were training Chinese pilots in Australia, numerous schools, and Duggan held without charges, apparently espionage. Now, this project at Tamworth was certified by the Chinese Communist Party in 2018. But meanwhile, the 56-year-old Daniel Duggan, having already spent 2 years behind bars over allegations that he unlawfully trained Chinese military personnel. He and his family made a last-ditch attempt to avoid prosecution in the US by sending an 89-page submission to Mark Dreyfus, the Attorney General, after a New South Wales magistrate had ruled in May that he was eligible for extradition. Now, we couldn't find this. They buried the news so deeply we couldn't find it in the Attorney General's media releases. There is, paradoxically, a release about an Australian citizen in Russia, unnamed, tut-tutting, was the Attorney General's department, about Russia's obligations under international humanitarian law. It said, the media release, I reiterate, this is Mark Dreyfus, I reiterate the government's clear advice to all Australians, do not travel to Ukraine. Good advice, but perhaps we need a statement warning visitors to Australia. Do not travel to Australia or become an Australian citizen or marry an Australian because you might be extradited to a country that does not adhere to international law, namely the US. I think they're above the UN. The US, which is in the thick of funding genocide in Gaza because its politicians are paid off by the genocide lobby. Last word to Dan Duggan. We are shocked, she said, and absolutely heartbroken by this callous and inhumane decision, which has been delivered just before Christmas and with no explanation or justification from the government. Now, we'd hoped to bring you better news. In fact, we'd even bought one of these things down at Aldi for $1.99. We're going to chuck that on and clown about with a bit of, end-of-year frivolity and wish you all a Merry Christmas. But how could we have possibly worn a Santa hat with all this sort of stuff going on? I mean, seriously. We're going to come back to you in the next few days with the usual Scam of the Week. Then we'll have Scam of the Year. It was a huge year for scams. In any case, a special shout out to Patreon supporters because we've been slugged with legal threats and so on this year, and we've got production costs and everything like that. So thank you for keeping us going. Have a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. I hope 2025 brings you a lot of good times. Thanks for supporting us. Please like, share and comment in the section below.